What does cocaine and food have in common in our brain? How do we take care of our brain? The Command Center. Dr. Keri Small, a young neuroscientist, breaks down complex concepts about our wonderful brain. She tells us about her fascinating journey to a Yale University lab. Stay tuned.
Baransu Balance Podcast with Dr. Ince emphasizes the interdependence and importance of a healthy mind, body, and soul.
Hello, welcome Dr. Keri Small to our Baransu Balance Podcast. So I'd like to start off with just asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself and how you ended up getting a PhD in neuroscience.
Absolutely. Happy to share, and thank you for the invitation. Okay, where does it start? I think the best place to start is I've always had an interest in biology and the body. And as a teenager, I was convinced that I wanted to be a physician. And I went to Oakwood College, now university, majored in biology, and I quickly realized that I am a germaphobe and I do not like being around sick people.
Oh, okay.
So that was, I think, my first life lesson in pivoting and staying true to what you're truly interested in. And I had a professor my sophomore year of college that suggested I do a summer internship at the University at Birmingham in Alabama,
Okay.
UAB. And I had no idea about the world of research, but I really was
Were you
interested.
a biology major?
I was actually a pre-med major, yes, and I had
Okay.
this crisis because
Mhm,
I don't like being around people who are coughing or I'm
mhm,
not squeamish about blood, but I just germs. If you have a cold, I am really like, just go home and
mhm.
feel better.
Okay. Okay.
So I had a professor who suggested, she also actually had a PhD, and it was encouraging students to consider research, even if they were interested in the medical field, because it was really helpful, especially for applicants to medical school. So I said, well, let me try this. This is something different. I was placed in a summer program in neuroscience. It was totally by chance.
Hmm.
I did not
Okay.
have any preference. It could have been microbiology, it could have been physiology, but I landed in a neuroscience lab, Dr. Sontheimer's lab at UAB. And that is where was exposed for 8 weeks. I stayed on campus and I was exposed to the wonderful worlds of research and working in a lab. And I really enjoy working with my hands. I love autonomy and asking difficult questions and conversing with people about complex topics. And so a lot of things were, I think, I really felt like I found my niche. I am an
Okay.
introvert by, um, I would consider myself an
Well,
introvert. And so
welcome to the introvert world.
and so I just really found that the lab was a place where I could flourish. And I kept in contact with my mentors at University of Alabama, talked more to my professors when I returned to Oakwood the following year, and I was exposed to the path of pursuing a PhD.
Okay.
And
So you didn't
because
really, before that, you really didn't know of any PhD researchers or,
I did not. I
okay.
knew of
Mm-hmm.
physicians, I knew of nurses and
Mm-hmm.
teachers, lawyers, but the PhD or researcher profession was definitely not something that I was familiar
Mm-hmm.
with.
Mm-hmm.
So, going to college truly does broaden your horizons and taking chances, doing something new. Um, but I definitely think that was a pivotal point in my path to pursuing the PhD. Um, and then again, making those connections, I was able to get recommendation letters, and ultimately I applied for the PhD program at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was accepted my senior year, and I just remember feeling so excited. And because neuroscience was the first discipline that I was exposed to, I kind of got hooked. The brain, neuroscience is one of the newer disciplines in science, and there's still a lot that we do not know. So I felt that I could really contribute to the legacy of the field and answer questions, that no one had investigated before.
Oh, that is wonderful, Dr. Small. I'm a physician, and I remember in medical school, about the most that I remember is that we were told we had the occipital lobe, that's in the
Right, the
back of the
different
brain.
lobes.
Then we have the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe and the base of the brain. But the brain is so complicated, like you said, and there's so much that we do not know about the brain. And what I love about you, Dr. Small, is that you're able to break it down for us non-brainiacs. Now, can you tell me? So one of the goals of this podcast is to have us understand the importance of the balance between the mind, mental, the physical, and the spiritual.
Sure.
And so with you, we're going to talk about the mental, the brain part. What part or parts of the brain control your ability to make good choices? Like, how were you able to make these good choices? What part of the brain helps us remember? What part of the brain helps us control our emotions? And then this is a subject that I'm interested in. That's the concept of neuroplasticity. What does that mean?
Okay, so you asked a lot of questions, and I
Yeah.
want to make sure I hit all of them.
Mhm.
So let's start from the beginning, and we'll get to your neuroplasticity question. Um, One of the things I am immensely passionate about is communicating science so that those from varying backgrounds can understand it, because we all have a brain, we all have a body, and the more we are educated about it, I think the better position we are in to make the best decisions for ourselves and our health. So you asked me first about the different parts of the brain. The brain, if you take a step back, is the command center. It communicates to the rest of the body what to do, how to do it. We are not always conscious of all of the things that the brain does. You talked about neuroplasticity. A lot of that happens when we are sleeping, and a lot of memory retention gets downloaded when we are sleeping. So there are things that we can consciously do or think about, and then there are things that the brain does without us even having to think about it. So the different lobes, as you mentioned, I'll give you a very basic lay of the land. We have different lobes. The front is the prefrontal cortex. This is where we make our executive decisions. This is where we use to, make good choices and decide, do I want to drink a green smoothie for breakfast or have a Pop-Tart? That is where we engage that part of the brain for
Many
our decision
times a
making.
day, many times a
Many
day.
times a day, many choices. We
Yes.
also have the temporal part of the brain, which traditionally works for our auditory input. So any sounds that you hear or interacting with your environment, this is near your ears is where the auditory lobe of the brain is. You also have the parietal, which is kind of in this region here, and that is also where the hippocampus lies, and deeper into the brain is where we have something called the amygdala. That is the control center for our emotions and our feelings, and where we process our fears or traumas, and also the hippocampus, where we can remember or engage our memory. And then the back of the brain is the occipital lobe, where we process visual stimuli. And also at the brain stem is where some of those processes that I mentioned that we don't necessarily have to think about, but our brain does control, like respiration or breathing or your heart beating, those types of things, is right in the back here where your brain stem is.
So before you go on, so basically, we can't live without a brain.
Absolutely.
And we can't even breathe. So you're saying that the stem of the brain helps keep the body going even when we're sleeping, the breathing, the heart rate. And that
Absolutely.
there's an area of the brain called the amygdala that helps process our emotions, not too far from the memory banks, the hippocampus, and that we need our prefrontal lobe to make all of these decisions. And it's a continuous circuit.
And one thing I
Okay.
like to always point out about the brain is all of these lobes are interconnected. They speak
Right.
to each other. And so you
Right.
talked about neuroplasticity. I also like to tell people, consider your brain as a muscle. And so the more you use it, the more you focus on different aspects, if whether it's applying yourself to studying or being a musician, those different parts of your brain are able to grow and also to atrophy or shrink if you don't use it. So don't use it, you will lose it, is very important when thinking about the brain and your mental state.
So we're talking about actually losing it. So those brain cells will shrink.
Absolutely. And
And
think about kind
mhm,
of a tree.
mhm.
So the more you use those brain cells, and you take care of them, they form more branches and they interconnect to different parts of the brain. And the less you use them, they start to shrink and die. And so you will have less communication between different parts of your brain.
So right now we're in the subject of neuroplasticity,
Yes.
where the brain is pliable. It's not how we used to think of it. We used to think, if you've had damage to the brain, it cannot be overcome. We were told that, once something is a brain cell is dead, there's no way around it. But so this concept of neuroplasticity
Sure.
is helpful in that we can form good habits after so many times of repeating the action. But what about bad habits? Does the brain change when we decide to do something that's not good for you?
So something that a lot of research has been dedicated to is exactly what you've asked about. So such as addictions, or let's say we choose to do something that is not beneficial for you, your brain will still that connection or that decision to make that negative choice, it gets strengthened. The more you choose to do that, the more it gets strengthened for that to be automatic. So if you consider, let's say every day I hit the snooze button on my alarm clock, and the more often I do that, the stronger the connections in my brain, from my brain into my arm to
Oh,
hit that snooze button. If you do it often enough, you almost don't have to think about it. It just becomes habit or natural.
so it's
And
an
so
a physical groove that is made in your brain
a
that
physical,
you don't have to think about it. You just hit that snooze button.
that's called a reflex, correct?
Wow.
And you can use that information for good or for bad. So if you have made bad choices in the past, but resolve in yourself that you would like to change your behavior, you can, in fact, practice, and just like we exercise to strengthen muscles, we can retrain our brain to make good choices for our
Oh,
bodies.
that's wonderful. That's a hallelujah, praise the Lord
It's the grace,
statement.
right? It's a
Yes.
grace.
Amen.
It's,
Okay.
it's the grace in our design. Absolutely.
Okay. So, Dr. Small, I understand that your journey took you from Tennessee all the way to Yale University. Can you tell me a little bit about your work there? And I understand it's in the area that we're talking about right now.
Sure. So I want to take a quick step back. While I was earning my PhD, I was in a neuroscience lab that studied pain in women. Why women are more prone to develop chronic pain disorders such as endometriosis or fibromyalgia. Um, and I learned that when people have chronic pain disorders, they often have a comorbidity or develop another illness that is actually linked to our moods. So behaviorally, so you'll find that people who suffer from chronic pain disorders also have depression or anxiety. And typically, our brains are such a um, so interesting that we try to fix these bad moods by numbing that pain, which can cause that repeated action if you're, let's say, seeking out a painkiller. So that because your body is trying to stop this physiological valid disease that is a chronic pain disorder, you can develop mental health issues as well. And I actually chose to go to pursue my postdoctoral training at Yale. Number one, because at the time I thought that I wanted to have my own lab and run a lab. And I chose someone who was very young and starting their research lab and was also a person of color. And it's very hard to find those two things at such a prestigious institution.
Can we digress briefly?
Sure.
So, what percentage of PhD neuroscientists are women of color? Do you know?
I actually don't know the statistics for women of color. I do know for women of color. I do know that for African Americans that have a PhD, I think it's less than 2% of us that actually have the degree. So it was truly finding a needle in a haystack. I am truly a believer, and also because of my training in neuroscience, if I can see something, then I can emulate it and I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I went to seek out someone who had been through my journey, understood the process of getting a PhD while Black, while a minority, at a world-renowned institution. I don't believe that there is any reason that we cannot train and work with the best minds in the world. And so I had a fantastic mentor, and I will give a shout out to Dr. Nee Addy, who is still an associate professor at Yale University. And in his lab, he studied both mood, that was something I was interested in, and he also studied addiction. Specifically, his laboratory
seem to go together.
They do. So you can understand kind of the natural progression or why not only did I choose to go to Yale just for the sake of going to Yale, but I was very intentional about choosing a mentor that I knew could understand my background without me having to articulate, potential struggles that I may have had. But to talk to you a little bit about the biology of addiction, in that lab, we actually studied cravings. Because the thinking is that if one could curb their craving, because we all know that addictions are bad. Nobody, wakes up in the morning and say, hey, I can't wait to take cocaine today. Or, hey, I can't wait to, shoot heroin today. It is truly a craving, and that learned behavior can precipitate an addiction.
So
And so
you were trying to figure out how to shortcut that
how to intercept that
pathway
pathway,
in the
that
brain.
neurological pathway, correct. And so the first thing we have to do is understand how the pathway works before we can develop drugs that can intercept or aid a person in trying to reduce or stop those behaviors, because they are very ingrained. Sometimes you don't even think about it. And that is the beauty of the brain, that, something we don't have to consciously think about everything that we do. And so the focus in Dr. Addie's laboratory was to understand the neurological pathways that underlie addiction and craving, specifically the euphoria or the joy, the
high
satiation of, getting whatever it is that you are craving. And so we targeted a cholinergic pathway. There's different pathways in the brain, but we specifically focus on the cholinergic pathway to figure out a way to curb cravings. And so we understood what neurons signal which neurons to precipitate that behavior, we are able to, let's say, give you a medication that would cause you to no longer associate craving with seeking a drug. And so that was a very eye-opening experience. I did behavioral research, so we did animal research. So from the neural level, when we actually looked at brain cells, all the way to animal models of addiction and craving, and understanding that pathway and how to help individuals who are truly, it can become a disorder that people don't want to have these negative behaviors, but how can medicine help people to choose better for themselves?
So you're saying that the cycle of addiction, may or may not have been precipitated or started with depression or some traumatic event, but that the cycle becomes so deeply ingrained in the brain that it's almost on
autopilot.
Autopilot. And that you were trying to break that cycle, trying to get rid of the chemicals that or break the cycle that would release the chemicals.
And the thinking is, if we could stop that reflex to, I want a drug, I must seek a drug, I have to get it, and allow your prefrontal cortex to engage and make a good decision, then the individual can say, hey, this may not be the best for me. Let me go to an AA meeting, or let me call my doctor to help because I am craving a drug or seeking a negative behavior. And so figuring out a way to slow down that reflex so that we can consciously be aware of what is happening and seek out a better alternative to satiate that need.
Okay, so before we move on to the next question, Dr. Small, how did you work with rats? Like rats? When like I said, I'm a medical oncologist, and in my early years, I also was interested in research. And at the NIH, we worked with mice. Mice are little, rats are big. So.
Okay, so one thing when you think about the scientific process, we actually used rats, number one, yes, because they are larger, their brains are bigger, meaning that they are more complex animals, and we could replicate those same experiments that we do in higher order animals, if you will. So before we start testing drugs in people, there has to be a process that we can figure out, is this safe? Most people will identify that they would rather a rat have a negative outcome with a drug than their loved one. And so rats in particular have learned behaviors similar to humans. And so that's why we used a rat model. I had gerbils as a child, and so they didn't, in the lab setting, they're bred, so they're not necessarily like the New York street rat that you think of, but they are specifically bred for the purpose of research. And like I said, that they are able to learn. You're able to train them. We actually had a rat model in our laboratory where we trained our rats to press a lever to receive an infusion of cocaine into their brain. And then after giving them different medications to see if we could reduce how often they press that lever. And so that's one of the models that scientists use in order to develop drugs, develop pharmaceuticals that can in turn be used in the population.
Okay, so I'm definitely into a healthy lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of foods or that can affect your brain in a positive or a negative way? And what about smoking cigarettes? We said that we were not going to discuss smoking marijuana, but how does this affect the brain, the command center?
So I always like to say food is the first drug that God gave man. It fuels us, it gives us energy. That's its primary purpose. And in addition to that, it gives us I think the Lord designed it this way. We actually crave food for our benefit because we say, I'm hungry, let me go and eat something. It provides me with energy and I can fulfill my purpose of, or whatever my chosen occupation is. And so in that, when we eat, we actually get a release of I'll say neurotransmitter, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with that terminology, a chemical in your brain is released to make you feel satiated. That tastes good. I love sweets, so I would say if you pick up a donut and you eat the donut, you feel, that tastes great, but that is also fueling your body. Now, we also have healthy foods and not so healthy foods. And what happens is, because our brain is the command center of all of the different system, the cardiovascular system, the musculature, all of these things, we don't necessarily need that energy in sugar form. We could, let's say, eat a fruit, and that would provide you with the same type of energy. However, because our brains have been trained to, that tastes good, or that's something we like, we tend to go towards the things that are not necessarily as healthy, but give us that satisfied feeling. And so when you talked about smoking or even alcohol, you always have to think of whatever you put into your body can also be used as energy. Your body breaks it down, uses as energy to fuel your brain. And the better things that you take, the more efficient your brain will work. And if, let's say, you put garbage or not so healthy foods into your body, your brain is still going to make do and use it as energy, but it's not going to be as efficient as, I would say, the Lord designed. And so when we smoke, those chemicals actually cross something called a blood-brain barrier, and they actually stimulate the neurons in your brain. And they can, if anyone has smoked before, you will feel the difference. You can be more relaxed or more alert or whatever the drug is designed to do. which will in turn affect your behavior. And we talked about those addictions and reflexive behaviors. A lot of people, I think, try those things and are not aware of the long-term effect damage that those things can do when you have those not so healthy behaviors.
Okay, so the smoking can definitely affect the brain directly, immediately, and indirectly through the hardening of the vessels in the brain. And what you're saying is that we have healthy choices that can affect the brain. Too much sugar can affect, the circulation in the brain, your
It
memory.
can make you feel more sluggish.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's making your brain more sluggish, you can think of it as a command center. Your choices are not going to be as clear. Your thought process is not going to be as clear. You're not going to make the best decisions for yourself. So it's often like we think of putting what's the base level of gas in your car versus the premium. And so, yes, it will get you where you need to go, but the person that designed your body and your brain has meant for them there to be a premium type of fuel that we should use.
Absolutely. And we want clear, healthy brains. So before we end, can we talk about the importance of sleep and why is it that the
Yes.
brain needs sleep?
Yes, yes, yes. So I talked at the beginning of our interview about the different parts of the brain, and one of the key places that integrates all of the things that we see, hear, and learn is a part in our brain called the hippocampus. And that neuroplasticity and the retaining of information, your body being able to sleep. When you sleep, you actually are, your brain is doing a lot of activity. It is upgrading, it is downloading information, it is storing it in long-term memory. And oftentimes we think, especially in American culture, that, go, 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 I must go if I just need to drink caffeine to stay awake. But sleep is so critical to
Very.
not just our mental health, but also our physical health. It allows our brains to be that perfectly designed command center to communicate to the rest of our bodies, okay, we need to, for those who are into exercise, that rest is as important as the exercise you're doing. You must give yourself a recovery period, and our brains are no different. I often refer to the brain as a muscle, and if you rest, that is critical time that your body needs to process, to help you to be clear and focused and more efficient with your time during the day. So sleep is, I think, one of the I think it's so discarded as something that's not necessarily important, or it's disposable, or it's not critical. But I'm a mother, so if anybody who is a parent will know, when you are sleep deprived, you do not make the best decisions.
That's right. I mean,
And
if you're sleep deprived, how are you going to have the energy to exercise
you don't
or
have the
or
energy
fix a proper meal
or make the
or
best decision for your family and your legacy.
mm-hmm,
Like, all of these things come into
mm-hmm,
play and
mm-hmm,
allow your body and your
mm-hmm,
your 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 heart, your lungs, even your gut to rest, reset, and then
mm-hmm.
be ready and be at optimal condition for the next day.
Well,
And you cannot catch up on sleep. I always say that you cannot catch up on sleep.
thank you for that tip, because you can't catch up on the weekend.
No, no.
So, Dr. Small, again, the goal of our podcast is to promote a healthy balance between the mind, body, and soul. So, how do you do that as you are currently working
Yep,
and you're helping researchers, from what I understand, and you have 3 kids, you have a
I
husband.
do.
Well,
It's
you
a
have
very full life.
you have mother. You're not. I mean, I'm not saying that you're taking care of her, but
No, I have
and
my family is all here, my
mhm,
extended family. Yes, I have a very full life, and um, I have grown and learned by trial and error because I am a scientist. Best things or best habits that work for me. And I would always say, you can have everything, but you can't have it all at the same time. And so there is something is going to trade for another, but you have to decide what are the most important things
mm,
that you want for yourself and for your life.
mhm,
And able to make those goals, you do need to have proper mental health and clarity of making good decisions that will impact you long term. And something that I think, especially the way I was brought up in a Christian home,
mhm.
and we're often taught to pray and to read our Bibles, but in a way, that is meditation.
It
And that
is.
is
It
calming
is.
your
Mhm,
mental, your spirit, and your physical body. And I
mhm.
think that's so key. There's many avenues of um, taking control of your consciousness and what you think about and feeding positive thoughts into yourself, eating properly, making good decisions. All of that is interconnected. And I think one of the things that my PhD professor taught me was you have to be a little selfish. You can't fill from an empty cup. So that's why we were taught when you wake up in the morning, pray first, pour into
Mhm,
yourself, get your energy, get a good night's sleep, get
mhm.
what you need so that you can be your best self. And I really have taken that to heart. And that is something that I am, especially as a mother, trying to learn to prioritize myself and my health so that I can be my best for my family.
So that you can be around there for them as well.
Exactly.
I I
I can,
really, really appreciate this, Dr. Keri Small from Houston, Texas.
yes, it was a
Thank you,
pleasure. Thank you so much
thank
for
you.
having me.
Until we meet again.
Good luck. Take
Bye.
care. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Amazing journey for Dr. Keri Small. As a medical oncologist, I would love to have another interview with Dr. Small as she currently works with cancer drug trials. I love the part that she states that for her, keeping balance includes putting God first. Remember, we are not rats and have choice. Choose rest and high-octane fuel for our brains, the command center. This is Dr. Christine Ince wishing you a balanced, healthy mind, body, and soul.